Welcome to the Deep Dive from BookCast FM, bringing books to life one cast at a time.
Hello.
Today we're really getting into a truly foundational piece of business thinking, Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma.
Yeah, it's a classic for a reason. And we're aiming for more than just a quick summary here. We really want to dissect it, pull out the key knowledge, the core insights.
Absolutely. The goal is to give you, our listener, a really solid grasp of why even super successful, well-run companies can just falter when something truly disruptive comes along.
Exactly. We'll cover the main concepts, look at some key examples Christensen uses, and hopefully pull out some actionable ideas too.
And just a reminder, if this deep dive sparks your interest and we think it will, please consider buying the book. There's a link in the description, and it's a great way to support the author's work directly.
Definitely worth a read.
Okay, so let's unpack this core idea. Christensen presents this puzzle, right? Companies doing everything by the book, listening to customers, investing smartly, focusing on profit, they still get blindsided. What's really at the heart of this dilemma?
Well, the crux of it really is this split between two types of innovation, sustaining and disruptive.
Okay.
Sustaining innovation is, making good products better for your existing customers. Think upgrades, new features on your phone, that kind of thing. It's what established companies are usually great at.
Right, that feels intuitive. They know their market, they know their tech. But disruptive sounds different.
It is fundamentally different. Disruptive innovations, they often start out simpler, maybe cheaper, more convenient. They catch on with a completely new group of customers, or maybe ones the big companies aren't really focused on. And here's the kicker. Initially, these disruptive products, they often don't perform as well according to the mainstream market standards. But, and this is key, they get better really fast sometimes. And eventually, they move up market and can actually displace the established players.
Wow. So the very things that make a company successful, listening to those best customers, investing in the high margin stuff, that can actually become a trap.
Precisely. It's not about bad management. Christensen is really clear on this. It's often the logical, rational decisions, the ones that look good on paper in the short term, that lead companies down this path of ignoring the disruptive threat. They're optimizing for what they know.
You mentioned optimizing for their value network. That sounds like a key concept. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Think of the value network as the whole context a company operates in. It's a customer, sure, but also what those customers value, the performance metrics that matter in that market, the typical profit margins, who the competitors are. It's the whole ecosystem.
Okay.
And disruptive technologies. They often pop up and gain traction in a different value network. Maybe one where price is more important than top performance, or convenience matters most. The old metrics just don't apply in the same way.
And Christensen uses the hard disk drive industry to show this wasn't just a one-time thing, right? It kept happening.
Exactly. That's one of the most compelling parts of the book. He tracks multiple generations of disk drives, 14-inch down to 8-inch, then 5.25, 3.5. Each time, a smaller, often initially lower performance drive comes along, targeting a new market, like mini computers, then PCs.
And the big guys missed it.
Consistently. The established players, focused on mainframes or later the high-end PCs, they'd look at these smaller drives and think, lower margins, our best customers don't want that yet. Small market, and they pass. Meanwhile, new companies jump in, serve that new market, and eventually their tech gets good enough to challenge the incumbents everywhere. It's a powerful illustration.
So this isn't just looking back at history. The Innovator's Dilemma is really a framework, a way to think about these forces moving forward.
Absolutely. Christensen lays out these core themes, the disruptive versus sustaining distinction, why good management isn't enough, the pitfalls of being purely customer-led, how organizations get rigid, and crucially, how you might actually foster disruption from the bottom up.
Okay, let's try and nail down some of the biggest takeaways then. What are the absolute must-understand principles from the book?
Well, one huge one is about customers. Listening to your current best customers. Essential for making your current products better, that's sustaining innovation. But relying only on them for cues about the future. That can be a massive blind spot for disruption because disruptive tech often appeals to totally different people or needs they don't even know they have yet.
So customer focus can be a double-edged sword.
Kinda, yeah. Another key point is why these disruptions look so unappealing at first. It's often because they start in small markets, maybe with lower profit margins. And for a big, successful company with growth targets, those small beginnings just don't move the needle. They don't look attractive compared to improving the core business.
It's like they're using the wrong telescope. We're looking at the wrong stars.
Exactly. And that leads to another major recommendation, the need for autonomy. Christensen argues strongly that if an established company wants to pursue a truly disruptive idea, it often needs to set up a separate, independent unit.
Like a spin-off or an internal skunkworks.
Sort of, yeah. A unit that has different goals, different metrics, maybe a different cost structure, and critically, is protected from the pressures of the main business. Otherwise, the core business's processes and priorities tend to just crush the new thing. And finally, there's this emphasis on uncertainty. Disruptive markets are inherently unpredictable. You can't just write a 5-year plan. It requires flexibility, experimentation, learning as you go.
That makes sense. You're entering uncharted territory. Okay, the book is also known for some really sharp quotes that capture these ideas. Let's dig into a few. How about, disruptive technologies typically enable new markets to emerge?
Yeah, this one's great because it flips the script a bit. Disruption isn't just about killing old markets. It's often about creating totally new ones, making something accessible, cheaper, simpler to people who couldn't use the old technology before. It grows a pie, initially at least.
And that ties right into the core problem with this quote. The very decision-making and resource allocation processes that are key to the success of established companies are the very processes that reject disruptive technologies.
This is the paradox in a nutshell, isn't it? The system's designed for efficiency, for serving those valuable existing customers, for predictable returns. Those same systems are almost perfectly designed to filter out or starve the weird, uncertain, initially low-return disruptive ideas. It's rational rejection, in a way.
It's the system working too well for its current context.
Precisely. Then there's customers wield extraordinary power over the fate of technological innovations.
This highlights that customer power again, but maybe the downside.
Exactly. While you need customer feedback for improving things, that focus can inadvertently block something radically new if your current customers say, I don't need that. Disruptions often serve future needs or create value in ways people haven't even thought of asking for.
And Christensen insists it's not about manager skill with. Managing innovation is not simply a matter of good versus bad management.
Right. He's saying, look, even the smartest, most capable managers doing what seems logical within their company's framework can lead the firm astray when faced with disruption. The problem is often structural, it's cultural, it's embedded in the processes and values, not just individual competence.
Okay. The uncertainty factor comes up again here. In many instances, the information required to make large and decisive investments in the face of disruptive threats simply does not exist.
This just nails the challenge, doesn't it? How do you make a big bet on something when all your usual tools, market analysis, financial projections are basically useless because the market isn't really there yet or it's completely fuzzy?
Which leads perfectly to maybe his most famous line. Markets that do not exist cannot be analyzed.
Yeah, you can't run focus groups for a market that hasn't formed. You can't size it accurately. Traditional market research fails you here. You need a different approach, more about probing and learning.
And things might go in weird directions, too. The ultimate uses or applications for disruptive technologies are unknowable in advance.
So true. Think about early computers or the internet. The initial ideas about their use were often way off. Disruptions often find their killer app somewhere unexpected, which makes it even harder for established players to gauge the threat or opportunity accurately.
From the big company viewpoint, there's also this practical hurdle. Small markets don't solve the growth needs of large companies.
This is a huge one. If you're a multi-billion-dollar company, you need big new revenue streams to keep growing at the rate investors expect. A tiny emerging market, even if it doubles every year, might just look like a rounding error for a long time. It's easy to ignore.
Which reinforces the next point. Disruptive innovations are generally first commercialized in emerging or insignificant markets.
Right. They start small, under the radar, often in places the big players have written off as not worth the effort. That's where they get their start, refine the tech, figure out the business model before they eventually move up.
But Christensen does offer a way forward, hinted at in this quote. Companies that are good at managing disruptive innovation have set up autonomous organizations charged with building new and independent businesses around the disruptive technology.
Yeah, this points directly to the main prescription in the book. If you're serious about tackling disruption, you often can't do it effectively within the main organizational structure. You need to carve out a separate space, give it independence, different rules, different expectations. That's how you overcome the inertia of the core business.
Okay, these quotes really bring the arguments to life. Let's maybe walk through the book chapter by chapter now, hitting the key insights. The introduction, Why Great Companies Can Fail, sets that stage.
It really does. It throws down the gauntlet immediately, challenging that idea that failure is always about incompetence. Christensen says, no, often it's the successful companies, the well-managed ones, that are most vulnerable. Their very success, their focus on current customers and high margins, creates the blind spots for these initially junky but rapidly improving disruptive technologies. Success breeds rigidity.
Then chapter 1 dives deep into that hard disk drive example. How can great firms fail? Insights from the hard disk drive industry.
Right, and this isn't just a quick anecdote. He meticulously traces generation after generation. You see these leaders in the mainframe drive market ignoring the 8-inch drives for many computers. Then the leaders in 8-inch drives dismiss the 5.25-inch for early PCs. Then the 5.25 guys miss the 3.5-inch for laptops. It's this recurring pattern.
Why? Always the same reasons.
Pretty much. Lower margins, existing customers weren't asking for it yet. The initial market looked too small. But the newcomers grabbed those niches, improved, and bam, displacement. It powerfully shows how focusing only on current customer needs can be fatal when technology shifts the game.
Wow, seeing it play out like that is compelling. Then chapter 2, Value Networks and the Impetus to Innovate, gives us the theory behind why this happens.
Exactly. This is where he introduces that crucial value network concept we touched on. It's the context of the customers, what they value, performance, price, size, the profit formula. Disruptive tech often fits a different value network initially.
So technology isn't inherently disruptive, it depends on the context.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A smaller, slower disk drive was worse in the mainframe value network, but it was better in the emerging PC value network where size and cost mattered more initially. Companies get stuck optimizing for their current value network and miss opportunities outside it.
So the takeaway is, understand your value network, but also be constantly scanning for other value networks where different rules apply.
Right. And chapter 3, disruptive technological change in the mechanical excavator industry, proves this isn't just a tech sector thing.
Ah, the diggers.
Yeah.
Cable versus hydraulic, right?
Yep. Hydraulic excavators started out weaker, maybe less reliable, for the really heavy-duty stuff dominated by the big cable-operated machines. The established companies, serving big construction firms, weren't interested.
But the hydraulic ones found a niche.
They did. Smaller jobs, tighter spaces where flexibility mattered more than raw power. And, like the disk drives, the technology improved. Hydraulics got more powerful, more reliable, and eventually took over almost the entire market because they offered advantages the cable machines couldn't match.
It reinforces that pattern.
Yeah.
Starts seemingly inferior, finds a new niche, improves, then displaces, and it highlights that idea of performance oversupply.
Exactly. The incumbents kept making bigger, more powerful cable machines, potentially more than many customers actually needed, which created that opening for the good enough hydraulic alternative that offered other benefits.
Okay, chapter 4 gets into a big barrier. What goes up can't go down. Moving down market is hard.
It really is. This chapter talks about the down market trap. Successful companies naturally gravitate towards higher margin products and customers. Their whole cost structure, their sales incentives, everything gets geared towards that profitable high end.
So going back down to serve a lower margin, emerging market feels wrong.
Yeah.
Unattractive.
Deeply unattractive. It might dilute profits, the sales team isn't incentivized for it, the cost structure doesn't fit. But guess where disruptive innovations often get their start?
Down market.
Exactly. So the very dynamics that drive success make it incredibly difficult organizationally and culturally to engage with these low-end disruptive threats until it's often too late.
So the solution, again, points towards separate units with different financial DNA almost.
That's a big part of it, which just leads nicely into Chapter 5, Managing Disruptive Technological Change. A case study. This starts shifting towards solutions.
Right, looking at companies that maybe got it right. What was the key?
The dominant finding, again, is creating those independent business units, giving them freedom. Freedom from the main company's processes, its metrics, its required profit margins.
Why is that separation so vital?
Because the main organization is optimized for sustaining innovation. Its processes, resource allocation methods, they all favor improving the existing stuff. A disruptive venture needs different processes, different timelines, different measures of success, especially early on. Separation protects it.
Okay, so independence is key. Chapter 6, Match the size of the organization to the size of the market adds another layer to that.
Yeah, this is a really practical point. Big companies need big wins to grow. A market that might only be, say, $50 million in its first few years, even if it has huge potential, just doesn't register as important enough for a $10 billion company to pour resources into, especially when there are immediate pressures elsewhere.
But for a small startup or a small independent unit,
A $50 million market is fantastic. They can focus, learn, dominate that emerging niche. So the principle is, the organizational unit tackling the disruption needs to be sized appropriately for the current size of the market, not the parent company's size. Small units for small markets.
that makes a lot of sense. Then Chapter 7 tackles the how, discovering new and emerging markets. How do you even navigate these fuzzy new spaces?
Well, you don't do it with traditional, detailed 5-year strategic plans based on extensive market research because, as we said, the market doesn't really exist yet in a predictable form.
So what's the alternative?
Christensen calls it discovery-driven planning. It's much more iterative. You make small bets, you launch early prototypes or minimum viable products, you get real feedback, you learn, you adapt, you pivot. It's about learning your way into the market rather than assuming you know the answers up front.
Failure is part of the learning process.
More agile, more experimental,
Okay.
less big bang planning. Exactly. Which requires a different management mindset. Then Chapter 8 asks you to look inward. How to appraise your organization's capabilities and disabilities.
So it's not just about the market, it's about whether your own company is even equipped to handle this type of change.
Right. Companies develop strengths, capabilities based on their history. These live in their resources, people, cash, tech, but more importantly, in their processes, how they work, and their values, what they prioritize.
And those processes and values, honed for success in the existing market.
Can become rigidities or disabilities when faced with a disruptive change that requires different ways of working or prioritizes different things like low margins or small markets.
Yeah.
You need an honest look. Are our ingrained processes and values actually going to prevent us from succeeding with this disruption? If so, that's another strong argument for needing a separate autonomous unit.
It's about having the right tool for the job. And sometimes the main organization just isn't the right tool.
Precisely. Chapter 9 brings it back to the technology trajectory versus market needs, performance provided, market demand, and the product life cycle. This revisits that idea of performance oversupply. Technology often improves faster than customer needs actually evolve. Think about, processor speeds at some point. Most users didn't need them to get faster and faster for basic tasks. When your product starts offering more performance than the bulk of the market actually needs or values, that creates that perfect opening at the bottom for a simpler, cheaper, good enough, disruptive alternative to sneak in. It starts by satisfying the less demanding customers and then improves, moving up market.
So it's a warning against just blindly chasing higher performance metrics without checking if customers actually still value those incremental gains as much as they might value simplicity or cost.
You got it. And that sets up the final chapter, Chapter 10, Managing Disruptive Technologies. Take action today. This is the call to action.
Pulling it all together, what's the final message for managers?
It's about urgency and approach. Recognize the threat early. Don't wait for perfect information. Start experimenting. Accept the uncertainty. And crucially, set up those independent organizations. Let them build their own way of working. Be patient for the market to grow, but be impatient for learning.
So flexibility, autonomy, learning focus.
Yes. Managing disruption isn't business as usual. It needs a different playbook, different structures, maybe even different kinds of leaders who are comfortable with ambiguity and experimentation.
Okay, so wrapping it all up, the core, powerful, maybe slightly uncomfortable insight from the innovator's dilemma is that doing things right according to the rules of your current success can actually pave the way for your failure when faced with real disruption. It's not necessarily bad management, it's the dilemma itself.
Absolutely. Understanding these forces, understanding the difference between sustaining and disruptive innovation, thinking about value networks, organizational capabilities, the need for autonomy.
Yeah.
It's just crucial stuff for anyone trying to navigate business today.
We really hope this deep dive has given you a solid framework for thinking about these ideas. And again, we really encourage you to pick up a copy of The Innovator's Dilemma yourself. Check the link in the description. Reading Christensen's own analysis and examples is incredibly insightful.
It truly is a book that changes how you look at business and innovation. Its lessons are, I think, more relevant than ever.
Well, thank you for joining us for this comprehensive look at a landmark book. We hope it sparked some thoughts. Join us next time for another exploration here on the Deep Dive from BookCast FM, bringing books to life one cast at a time.